Start with a big 10-gallon aluminum pot. I take 5 gallons of bottled water and just put it into the pot and put it on high until this hits 160 degrees. You'll have one of these units from somebody that you bought from Craigslist or OfferUp, and it's going to have the spout and it's going to have the inside filter that's there, and you're going to put your grains inside that. The grains you're just going to get from a local brewery shop that has supplies, local brewer's supplies. I use one called Northwest Brewing Supply in Burlington, and they're great and they know what they're doing. And just tell them you're making a 5-gallon batch and they'll get you all of the grain that you need. They'll just ask you your taste preference. While your water is boiling, it's time to get out all of your supplies. So one of the first ones you get out is the carboy, which is where your beer is going to ferment. Next to your 5-gallon carboy, you're going to get some star sand that's going to sanitize and disinfect everything. And it's not like bleach, it's actually clean. It's very clean, and it's an acid. It's not toxic. You wouldn't want to drink it, obviously, but you just rinse it out really easily, and it does a fantastic job keeping your equipment sterile. Okay, get a bucket. This is just a pour bucket, but I'm going to use it nonetheless. Tap water. 3 or 4 gallons in there, and then put in your star sand. 1 ounce per 5 gallons. Inside the star sand disinfectant, you're going to put these items: a funnel, a stirring spoon, a little tubing that connects to your wort mixer, the nozzle of your wort mixer, a couple stoppers, one with a hole, one without a hole, and your little bobber that goes in during the yeast fermenting process. So just know that these items get put in a disinfectant. This doesn't belong. When the water's almost 160 degrees, get your grain bag and get ready to pour it inside your container. Get another gallon or so of other water heated up to about 160, because this theoretically needs to be at about 6 gallons when it's boil time, and it's only 5. And you're gonna flush through the grains a couple times until you get about 6 gallons out of it. So I've got my 5, I've got like 1.5 here. There's gonna be some evaporation, so you always wanna overdo a little bit with the water. Water's at 160, so it's time to pour. Okay, 160 degree water poured in. Smells lovely. It's really nice aroma, like a really nice tea. And then you're gonna cover this and let it sit for an hour. So one thing to remember as this sits for an hour is sterile is key. It's very important that everything is really clean before you do anything. But even up to this point, things don't have to be perfect, because after this is a boil. And so if there are any bacteria or issues or anything like that, it will boil out because you boil for an hour. But again, you want to practice cleanliness as best as you can and use the Sand Star on all this equipment before you start. But you can potentially make some mistakes and it comes out in the boil. Okay, so you plug in your clear hose to the spout that was in the disinfectant, and you'll have it sit in the bottom. Loosen the lids for airflow to then turn open the valve, and then you're just going to let all of this drain out. You want this marked somewhere at about 6 gallons somehow, and so if you hit about 4.5 gallons, which is what you'll hit with this, then you can pour this through the mix in the top and then let that drain through until you have about 6 gallons in here. And there it goes, and you just let it run until this empties. And like I said, fill it with more warm water at 160 until it hits 6 gallons marked on your container. The smell is fantastic. It's makes this part very fun. Another thing you can do in this process to really get all of the wort out is to just get a really long spoon that you have sterilized. In this case, this is just a plastic spoon, and just stir it in there. Really stir through that entire mix. It's like a big giant tea vault is really all this is. And so you just want to squeeze all of that juice out. Okay, remove your clear tubing. Make sure that it's completely drained out. Do the best that you can. And so we put it back over on the stove. And enjoy the aromas that come out, especially when we put in the hops later. It just makes it a really nice experience. Have a cup of coffee along with the process, maybe have some of your favorite music like a Mark Knopfler or something like that playing. It's nice. But really this process now is to get this to boil. And once it boils, you boil it for an hour. So we're gonna let this sit for a bit. This process takes a while. You're not necessarily supposed to do this, but I check on it periodically to make this process faster. I'm gonna cover the heat, but you just have to be really careful because when it boils quickly and you don't want any boil over. So if you're going to cover it, you need to check on it very quickly, and then whenever obviously it's close to starting to boil, then you are going to remove the lid and then start the next process when it boils. So as far as the hops go, I got two different variety here. The local brewmaster gave me these that go with my, it's basically a red. Again, I'm a basic beginner, so I just know that it's a red beer. These two flavors get sprinkled on during the boiling process. So this is about boiling, and what I'm going to do is take the lid off and let it do a rolling boil. And then about every 10 to 15 minutes, and again, I'm not a professional, I just sprinkle a little bit of each of these in. One thing I do know is that I believe early in the process, if you put in the hops, that's more for flavor of that particular type of hop. And then near the end of the boil, even within the last minute or so, that's when you put the hop in that you like the aroma for. So that's the big difference between the two, but I just sprinkle them in during the process in about 10, 15-minute intervals. Okay, so this is what you want to maintain, which is basically a rolling boil. You don't want it to bubble too much, so adjust your heat so that it just kind of stays at a roll like this for 1 hour. And then I'm going to even start by putting in a little bit of some of my hops that I have. And I'm just going to put a couple dashes in there just to get it started. And one of my favorite parts of this whole process is the smell and the aroma that comes off of the hops when you put them in. It's really nice, makes it fun. And then I take out my big plastic nylon spoon or plastic spoon, whichever, and just kind of stir that in a little bit. And again, this is gonna go for an hour. And you keep putting in your hops until they're gone near the end, but save like a nice little bit to dump in with about a minute left for the aroma. And then with a minute left as well, I'm gonna pour in some freshly pressed juice that I'm gonna make as part of this. You don't have to do that, but if you have a type of juice that you would like to add in near the end, go for it. I'm gonna put in probably about 2 cups of a pressed juice, but again, it's not necessary. Also, while the wort is sitting and I have the Sandstar mix here cleaning everything else that I'm going to use, I like to pour, I don't know, half a gallon or so in this with it corked, and just shake it every once in a while just to make sure this is absolutely sterile, because sterileness, if that's a word, is the key once it gets in the carboy. So I'm gonna pour a little bit of this in here and then shake it periodically throughout the rest of the process. So pour it in, shake it, let it suds for a while, turn it upside down, shake it again. Do that throughout the process every 10 or 15 minutes just to make sure that you're nice and sterile inside the carboy. I never really liked the name carboy for this because it just doesn't quite explain what it does. I like to call it the fermenter. Carboy sounds like too much inside baseball, but for people that just want basic terms, I like to also refer to this as the fermenter. So I've taken it off the boil for 1 hour. And I just put it in a cold water bath in my sink. There are better ways. People use copper coil and things like that. I haven't bought that yet. I just put cold water in, and then once that cold water gets hot, then I drain it, add more cold water, and then add a bunch of ice. Essentially what I want to do is just really get this to about 76 degrees on this temperature. That's the high point at which you can start putting it in the fermenter. And so really it's just to wait for this to cool down, do what you can to get it to cool down. At this point, sterile is extremely important. And so you do not want to get any type of bacteria inside because you're below the boil temperature. And so I'm going to add ice, I'm going to add new water, I'm going to do whatever it takes an hour or two, and it gets me down to 76 degrees. And then at that point, I pour it into the carboy, or what I like to call the fermenter. Okay, so this is pretty much cooled down to the touch. Feels about like room temperature, not a guarantee. But then over here I have all of these freshly sanitized. I poured all of the sanitized equipment out of that. A little bit of foam is okay. That's pretty natural to have a little bit of the sand star left over in the foam. You're gonna have a couple drips in there. I've got a funnel and then a sieve here that's gonna kind of filter everything out. So what I'm gonna do is take and pour everything that I have into the fermenter. And then we're gonna make sure the temperature's right on the fermenter before we throw in the yeast. Once poured and you see that your temperature falls within the range of about 74, 75, 76, somewhere in there, you are good to pitch or throw in your yeast. And again, this is one of those things I defer to the brewmaster. He gives me everything in the package that I need, and then we will pour that yeast in there. Here's the yeast that they gave me. I'm gonna tear the top of it off, and then I'm just gonna pour it right into the spout, and then I'll show you how to cap it. So finally, you basically pull the cork and the little bobber contraption out of there, and it essentially gets filled about halfway with your star sand. And then basically that percolates as the yeast starts to activate, it starts to bubble, and it doesn't let any oxygen in or anything. It just kind of bubbles out over the next 2 weeks. You let this sit for 2 weeks, and then we will start part 2 of the process. So again, the temperature is at 76. I've got this cork in, I've got the little bubbleator that's in there configured, and it's in 3 parts. It's the cap, it's the little floater on the inside, upside down, and then the actual cylinder that it sits in, inside the cork. And we'll see you in 2 weeks. One final note, for the 2 weeks, you want to set this somewhere dark at room temperature. You want it to sit at about 70 degrees or so, and it's going to sit in a dark area for about 2 weeks.